Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today, Assemblyman Bob Oakes. Bob Oakes represents the 128th Assembly District in New York, and that includes the counties of Wayne, Cayuga, and Oswego. And we want to thank you folks all throughout the 128th District for joining us. And Bob Oakes, it's nice to see you. Happy 2012.
Good to be here, Mike.
This is our first show of the 2012 legislative session, the 2012 calendar year for that matter, and we got a lot to get caught up on.
There's a lot going on in the state capitol, and obviously if there's things going on here that impacts the people throughout New York State.
And I think everything that is going on here at the state capitol, in one way or another, Bob Oakes has his hands right involved in the middle of it somehow, some way, and we're going to be covering that as much as we can in the next 15 minutes. We're going to start off with the way any legislative session starts off here at the state capitol, and that's with a little bit of a rundown of the startup of the year. And the startup of any legislative year typically begins with a speech from the governor of the state to the legislature, in which the governor tends to set out his agenda, what he would like to see happen. And I think you'd have to agree, Bob Oakes, that Governor Andrew Cuomo kind of set that bar pretty high last year with his State of the State, what he wanted to accomplish, and what he got accomplished in the first year of his term.
Well, and clearly in that State of the State, the governor talked about the past year and things accomplished, but also clearly it's looking forward. It's saying where we are today, but what I'd like to do during the 2012 legislative session.
Let's take a look and a listen now to some of what was said that day when the governor gave his speech to the legislature. We'll be back to talk more and get some reaction from Bob Oakes.
We have just started tackling the problems that this state needs tackled. This agenda that we laid out today is an ambitious agenda, more ambitious than anything this government has done in decades and decades and decades. We can build the largest convention center in the country. We can rebuild Buffalo. We can transform the Jacob Javits site. We can build a whole new energy highway system. We have that capacity. It's who we are. It's where we come from.
Well, I think Governor Cuomo today reflected on the successes of 2011, and moving forward to 2012, the discussion is going to center around jobs, 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 which I certainly agree with, but certainly some of the ideas that the governor floated today, the key question is, where's the money going to come from?
What I liked that the governor said, he talked about jobs, he talked about economic development. We certainly want to work. He didn't talk enough about really changing the business environment of the state. I think we need to push him to do that. He didn't talk about enough mandate relief, at least he mentioned it. And he didn't talk about getting at Medicaid and the costs that are driving the cost of New York State. But overall, the governor was an upbeat sense of saying, I want to work with the legislature to change New York. We're going to be pushing him, hopefully, to do it in the right direction.
The governor did spend a lot of time during that presentation talking about some things that, I don't know, I would think the people in the 128th District would have kind of tuned out on, and that is a new convention center for New York City, spurring the economy of the city of Buffalo, that sort of thing. But as you and Minority Leader Cole both noted there was some discussion on, general discussion on jobs and trying to improve the entire state's economy. You particularly noted mandate relief. Based on what happened in last year's legislative session, the enactment of a property tax cap, there has been a huge hue and cry from local government officials that the state's really got to ease up on us a little bit if they want us to live within this idea of a property tax cap where they can only raise revenues by so much. They feel the state's asking a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And, you know, this was a reaction on January 4th. The governor followed that up, as we're going to look at in a minute, with his budget proposal where he begins to talk about, I mentioned Medicaid costs to the counties. The governor does have a proposal surrounding that issue. The regulatory environment for the businesses of New York State to see if we can keep this economy or get this economy moving. You know, the greater Rochester area and upstate in central New York is actually right now leading the state in some job growth. And so you see some opportunities for that to for us to build on that. I want to make sure that the state government is getting out of the way and helping that economy to pick up, as opposed to doing things to hinder it. And that's where I think when I said we need to push the governor, we need to push him in those ways that help that happen.
You mentioned the greater Rochester economy. I can't help but think of some of the news that I've read over this past week about the financial difficulties of Eastman Kodak. That's got to be kind of casting a pall over the community, the greater community, as to some concerns about what the future may hold.
Clearly it is, but even in the midst of that, Rochester has suffered through, a Kodak decline over the last actually 10 years or even longer, and you've seen other parts of the economy picking up, and so obviously that pull is there, but even in the midst of that, that economy continues to chug along and actually add jobs, and we're going to hopefully see Kodak actually, hopefully saving itself in some entities so that the 7,000 remaining workers for that company may have an opportunity to continue to work for it.
It was only a couple weeks later that the governor met with the legislature again to say, all right, you want to know exactly what I was talking about in that State of the State message. Here's my budget proposal, and he handed that to the legislative leaders and the entire New York State Legislature, Senate, and Assembly. Let's again take a look and listen to some of what was said that day when the governor handed his budget ideas over to the legislature.
How does government spur private sector job creation in a down economy while limiting spending and maintaining fiscal discipline? The answer is creative public-private sector partnerships that leverage state resources and assets to generate billions of dollars in economic growth. It's easy to say, it's hard to do.
I thought the governor's presentation was very good in the fact that it limited the growth of state spending, calling for a variety of consolidation of state agencies to make the size and cost of state government smaller. Certainly a mandate relief and talking about the state capping the cost of Medicaid to counties over a 3-year period, although I prefer 1 year, but I'll take 3 years if we can't get the 1 year. Pension reform, which will limit the growth of pension costs of taxpayers in the future. I think this was a good blueprint for negotiations and discussions with the public and the legislature.
Governor Cuomo's initial proposal, as we're looking at it, really gives some hope that if you can hold state spending, if you can provide some mandate relief in the long term for our counties and local governments, I think that puts us on a path to building on year one of Cuomo's budget. I've said all along that the second year is more important than the first year. And how we move forward, budget hearings are going to start next week. I'm going to be sitting in those hearings. I'm going to be asking the tough questions, but certainly this is an excellent starting point.
In fact, we had to move your taping of this program up just a little bit earlier this morning so that you can leave here, walk down the hallway, and be ready to sit down in one of those, the first of this year's budget hearings. That process is just about to begin.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, topic number one is elementary and secondary education. Always a big concern to especially the 128th district and upstate counties. One of the questions that we're going to be asking in addition to the issues related to the economy that we just talked about and mandate relief for local governments and how we can try to limit the cost of government and to our property taxpayers. The issue of education and the way we deliver education in the state, some of it is around how we do it, how the education system works, and some of it is how does the state distribute $20 billion out to the different school districts. And an analysis that we've shown is both when the state cut funding to education, the districts that were hardest hit tended to be a lot of some of those rural upstate schools. And we're looking at, as now there's some additional money the governor put in the budget this year, is he restoring some dollars equitably, and how are our local schools going to fare? We're seeing an awful lot of pressure based on the type of offerings that we have and some of the other issues surrounding education that we are going to be focusing on some of those things again in a budget hearing coming up in a few minutes. Then we move on after today, the first of 13 hearings. We'll go to local governments, we'll go to transportation and health and human services and the numerous other areas of the state budget. And so a lot of time is going to be spent in the next 3 or 4 weeks on hearings to talk about the budget, get public input, receive that, ask tough questions of the people who are administering those dollars around the state, and then trying to move forward with the governor over the last 3 or 4 weeks or during the month of March to come up with a finalized plan that hopefully holds spending overall and controls spending for the state, but then distributes it in an appropriate way.
One of the other issues the governor brought up, which I think really got the attention of New Yorkers, whether it's from upstate New York or even the downstate metropolitan area, is talking about tying the distribution of some of those funds to education to the idea of improving teacher evaluations. It just seems to have grabbed the fancy of a lot of people that has sort of gotten away from state officials, from local officials, from school districts themselves, to be able to do anything about the people that are actually in the classroom instructing the children. The governor says he wants to change that a little bit, and he wants to get serious about it. And the way to get serious about it is to tie the dollars to the program, and that's what he says he wants to do.
Well, let's hope at the end of the day, and whether that's the end of this year or the end of the governor's term and whatever, we end up with a better education system in New York State, that we end up with the best teachers in the classroom with our kids, and hopefully we end up with kids actually learning in ways that prepare them for the jobs that are hopefully going to be grown in this state as we move forward.
We have so much to talk about here. The Medicaid reform that was mentioned, the pension reform, these are all huge issues that the governor has laid out there and put out on the table. We've only got about a minute left, though, and I want to spend at least that minute on the fact that one of the other things that you're very busy dealing with during your time right now is this idea of redistricting. All 150 members of the Assembly, all 60-some members of the Senate, all of their district lines need to be redrawn. It's a huge process, and you're one of the people involved.
Actually, we're going to be seeing within the next few days initial lines coming out that would set what the legislative lines proposed would be over the next 10 years. Then there will be another hearing process around the state for people to give input on that, and hopefully we'll see in March actually somewhat of along the same line of the budget, but hopefully before the budget, we'll see some finalized lines for the legislature and the congressional districts in New York State. This is something that's critical as far as apportioning how upstate and districts around the state will look over the next 10 years.
I left out the congressional lines being drawn. That's just another little part of the process. It's a very politically sensitive process. It is very controversial, and just because we're going to see those initial lines next week or within the next few days, something tells me this has got a long way to go.
It does.
All right. Well, Bob Oakes, we'll look forward to meeting with you on that particular process and getting updated on where the legislature is moving in this 2012 legislative session. If you folks watching want to reach out to your representative, you can do that by getting a hold of Bob Oakes at his office in Lyons. You can pick up the phone and dial 946-5166 or send an email to oaksr@assembly.state.ny.us. As we thank Bob Oakes for joining us today, we thank you folks too. We'll hope to see you soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.